Check. Okay, may audio na ba? Hello, audio 1, 2, 3. Let me know kung may audio na po. Okay na? May audio na? Wala pang audio. Now, yes, with audio. May audio na. Okay na. Ulitan. Thank you very much for your feedback. Ako po si Trixie Cruz-Angeles for Luminous. And today we're going to talk about heritage. Pero hahapyawan din natin, especially sa Q&A, yung mga issues about the CPP and PA. Kasi marami pa kasing misinformation that is out there. Gayon pa man. What is heritage? Ang heritage, ito po, yung pagkakaintindi natin dito, ay pamana. And that is correct. Pero may pamana na personal. Halimbawa, ito binigay sa akin, pamana ito sa akin ng lola ko. Ito, iniwan sa akin ng lola ko, ng nanay ko, ng lelang ko, etc. And then we also talk about heritage houses, or as some people might not correctly say, ancestral homes. Di ba? Ancestral homes. Not exactly what you mean. But a heritage house, iba yung heritage house, iba yung heritage structure sa ancestral home. Kasi very specific naman yung ancestral home. Gayun pa man, so sige, what is heritage? Well, it's so important to us na meron tayong mga provision sa ating saligang batas that specifically protect cultural treasures and the artistic treasures of the country. So yung pag sinabi natin yung mga cultural treasures na yan, yan ang tinatawag na natin na heritage. Okay? Pero, and it's so important to us that the Constitution actually says that the state can regulate its disposition. Pero tama, sabi ni Avelino Taroy, like and share muna mga ka-Luminous. Don't forget to click the like button. And don't forget to, to share. And especially to share sa Twitter, sa Facebook, ganyan. Lalo na sa Twitter kasi maraming hihimatayin na naman. Okay, so don't forget to like and share. Now, what's going on with heritage? Well, hindi siya ganong kaingay, hindi gaya dati, no? Pero, gayon pa man, meron tayo, dahil sabi ng ating saligang batas, maaaring i-regulate ang disposition niya, ibig sabihin nito ay maaari tayong gumawa ng mga batas na lilimatahin ang acts of ownership over them. Okay? But first, what is heritage? There's several kinds. There's tangible and intangible. Merong movable tsaka immovable. So, ano yung movable? Well, ito yung, syempre, nabibit-bit mo. Ano yung mga immovables? Yung mga nakakabit sa lupa or those attached to an immovable kung walang intensyon na tanggalin yon. So, what are attached to an immovable? Yung mga gayak ng bahay, di ba? Yung iba may mga flying buttresses. Yung iba may mga beams na may mga kolorete, meron siyang mga ukit-ukit. They're not intended to be removed from the house, and therefore, they're part of the immovable. Madali yung movables, di ba? Yung pwede mong bitbitin, sukbitin, bulsa, etc. Mga ganon. Is a door considered movable or an immovable pag binaklas mo na sa bahay? Well, if there was no intention na baklasin siya dun sa bahay, then it is considered part of the immovable. Ngayon, ano pa? Well, ano yung examples ng movable and immovables? Well, ang immovables, syempre yung mga simbahan, mga, torogan. Torogan are the traditional houses sa Mindanao, no? What about buildings? Kasi buildings from the 1930s and the 1940s are just as valuable as those that are 200 years old. Ano pa? And of course, yung mga yung mga nakakabit sa kanya. Ngayon, what are the other types of heritage? Merong tangible and intangible. Doon sa tangible are those that we can hold. So, doon sa mga examples natin na movable and immovable, usually they are the tangible forms of heritage. Ano yung mga intangible? Dances, songs, ito yung mga ephemeral. Pag nasayaw na yung sayaw, or even the choreography itself, heritage din po yon. So yung mga traditional dances natin, yung choreography niya, yung and yung mga movements niya, lahat yon ay intangible heritage. What are the others? Knowledge systems. So, yung technology, yung pagkakaalam, yung tradisyon ng pag-uukit ng rice terraces, halimbawa, is part of intangible heritage. The rice terraces themselves are immovable cultural heritage. But then, cultural heritage can be classified even further as natural and purely cultural. So, may mga natural that are cultural sites, so we call them mixed sites. So, itong classification ng natural or mixed site ay classification na ginawa ng ating World Heritage Office. And ito yung mga, so the nice thing about a mixed site is, ang Pilipinas has one of the first, yung rice terraces, but not the Banawe rice terraces, ha? It's not even the Ifugao rice terraces. It's the rice terraces of the Philippine Cordilleras kasi 4 ang probinsya na covered ng ating rice terraces in declaration as a World Heritage Site. And dati kasi, iba yung natural site, iba yung cultural site. But the first ever declaration of a mixed site was the rice terraces of the Philippine Cordilleras. Ngayon, may kwento dyan. Ang tumulong talaga dyan sa paggagawa ng deklarasyon o pagkakakilala sa rice terraces natin was a guy named architect Augusto Villalon, Toti, yung nickname niya. And at the time, he was the possibly foremost heritage architect of the country. At kilala siya sa kanyang expertise na kinilala siya ng Pambansang Komisyon ng Sining at Kultura para dito. Ngayon, he was with the World Heritage Council at tumulong siya dun sa pagdedeklara at pagsusulat ng deklarasyon ng ating rice terraces of the Philippine Cordilleras. Dun sa ano ba yung significance? Ngayon, maraming nagsasabi hindi siya ganong katanda ayon dun sa latest studies ng ating National Museum. Pero dun sa traditionally, ang pagkaalam natin is the rice terraces are much older than that. Hindi pa po conclusive yung latest studies. Well, yung latest studies or latest finding dun sa last dig ng National Museum is one finding, but it still needs further study para masabi natin na talagang 100 or 200 years old lang po ito. Sabi ni Jenny Webb Salcedo, sana maasikaso agad yung mga illegal na tubo na umaangas sa Manila Bay. Ano po yun? Sabi ni Sai 1988, ang daming dating heritage sites na ginawang private establishments. I remember watching this docu about the old house of Rizal's parents in Laguna. Not sure kung nandun pa. Okay, that story I know. Bahay po ito ni Teodora Alonso, mother ni Rizal. She was an only child and either of a second marriage or of an illicit relationship. I don't remember that part of the story. Okay, and it was in Laguna. Dun nakatayo yan sa Laguna. There was a last-ditch effort dun sa mga advocates ng lugar na yon na isalba yung bahay. Kasi binili siya para ilagay siya dun sa Bataan. Dun sa isang, parang ba to? It's a place where they buy all old houses, tapos naka-display yung mga lumang bahay na yon. For conservationists kasi, yung ganong pagdi-display, which is out of context, is not encouraged. Siguro as a last-ditch effort para masalba yung bahay. Pero yung mga ganong bahay, remember what I said about immovables? The house is actually an immovable because it is attached to the land. But when you're talking about heritage, pagka sinabi nating heritage yan, pati yung konteksto niya bahagi ng heritage. Ngayon, posibleng nagbago yung mundo around the heritage site, mahalaga pa rin na nandun siya sa original na lagayan niya. Kasi this belongs to the people of that place. Bahagi ito ng kanilang, how do you call this? The tapestry of their environment, the tapestry of their heritage includes that house. So kung taga dun ka sa Laguna, at nilabas yung mga bahay na ganon, yung mga immovables, kayo yung nadideprive ng inyong heritage kapag nawawala ito. Kaya hindi natin ini-encourage. In fact, kung papansinin ninyo, yung mga cultural agencies, hindi po ini-endorso yung mga lugar kung saan bumibili sila ng lumang bahay, itatransport at ililipat doon sa ibang lugar at i-display na akala mo, ano ba siya, parang perya. 'Di ba na, ito, galing ito sa ganito, 'di ba? Come one, come all. Hindi yan ini-encourage. Sabi ni Saysay, do we really need bills to pass into law so we can declare something as heritage sites? We have our own heritage commission. Isn't that enough? We actually already have a law, the Heritage Act of 2009. And ini-enforce namin ito dati. Kaya lang, as with any other law, it also depends on the political will of the people tasked to enforce it. Bakit naman sasabihin ninyong isn't that enough? And what is the Heritage Commission? We have none. We have the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. Siya yung primary enforcer ng ating heritage laws together with the National Historical Commission. Actually, mas maganda sana kung yung batas ay ilagay na lang sa isang ahensya lahat ng enforcement ng heritage laws natin. Kasi kung maaalala ninyo yung ating Torre de Manila, this was precisely the reason kung bakit natalo ang mga advocates in protecting the landscape of Rizal. Okay? So, yan, ang dami na palang misconceptions about this. Sabi ni Adrian Abuhandan, regarding dun sa rice terraces, nasisira siya dahil dun sa mga worms and soil erosion. Well, the worms and soil erosion are a single problem. And yes, that's part of it. Alam niyo kung bakit? Mayroong nag-introduce ng African night crawlers sa rice terraces thinking that they would make the soil more fertile. But what they do is, ini-erode niya yung walls ng rice paddies. So, you have to keep removing them. Otherwise, parating gumuguho. Of course, you can always rebuild. Pero there has to be a way para maagapan yung paglaganap ng earthworms. That's why we keep saying to everybody na meron tayong environmental laws about the introduction of flora and fauna that are not indigenous to a particular area. Ngayon, naiintindihan nyo na. Pero hindi lang po yun ang dahilan kung bakit maraming problema yung ating rice terraces. So, let's get to that. Hindi lang po yung object or yung knowledge system ang heritage natin. It is also the interplay of all of that. So, nung diniklara yung ating rice terraces of the Philippine Cordilleras, later on, dineclare as World Intangible Heritage yung hudhud, which is the chant of it's the Ifugao chant about their history, about their mythology, and it is chanted during particular times in a person's life, in particular events of the community. Ano pa? Yung basketry na naging resulta ng kultura ng lugar, bahagi din yan sa heritage that also includes the rice terraces. Yung klase ng bigas na itinatanim sa rice terraces na tinatawag nilang tinawon. Ang tinawon kasi means actually yearly kasi once a year lang pwede yung crop na yon. Kung natikman niyo na po yung tinawon, tataba talaga kayo kasi ang sarap-sarap niya and it's very fragrant and napapakain ka ng gusto. So, ano pa? One of the other reasons kung bakit hindi na ganun kalaganap o ganun ka-extravagant yung ating rice terraces ay dahil usually subsistence lang yan. Kasi once a year lang po yung crop na yon. Yung ibang mga pamilya, some of them do not find it that it pays enough or that it is enough to feed their families na ituloy-tuloy nila yung pagtatanim. So, meron din silang diaspora, mga umaalis dun sa lugar kasi nga there not enough jobs, the terraces will not sustain them, and so on. So, part yan ng natural na progression ng isang lugar. So, we'll talk about how to save it later on. Ngayon, pero yung knowledge system niya is still existent. Sabi ni Sniper Fox, sa Japan, ginawa nilang concrete na ang rice paddies. Hindi siya kasi advisable sa bundok especially dun sa lugar. And I'll explain why. Bakit very fertile yung rice paddies dun sa rice terraces? Because it is a self-sustaining ecosystem. So, dun sa pinakatuktok ng bundok, nandun nakatanim yung mga puno at yun ang nagiging watershed nila. Dahil napakataas din ang lugar, minsan nag-intersect, yung clouds are so low-lying, may continuous provision ng moisture at nag-accumulate yan. At dahil meron silang watershed doon, yung pagdaloy ng tubig tuloy-tuloy, halos buong taon. In fact, pagka dun sa mga households sa Ifugao especially, pag tinanong mo magkano binabayad nyo sa tubig, yung iba titignan ka ng, may bayad ng tubig? Parang ganon. So, yun yung, tapos, tuloy-tuloy ang daloy ng tubig. Yung iba, maglalagay sila ng catchment pond dun sa baba at naglalagay sila ng isda doon. So, kumpleto na halos. Dun sa certain patches of land, magtatanim naman sila ng gulay. So, kumpleto ka na. Diba? Meron kang bigas, meron kang pond ng isda, meron kang maliit na patch para sa gulay. Ngayon, bahagi ng heritage din is the entire landscape. So, paano natin pinoprotektahan ngayon ng landscape? Well, hindi natin ini-encourage, halimbawa, yung paglalagay ng yero na bubong. Unang-una, pag maraming yero na bubong, umiinit yung lugar. But, even assuming na hindi siya dumami, pag tinignan mo na siya, hindi na siya yung traditional landscape. Kasi, as we know, iba yung traditional home ng Ifugao or ng mga taga-Cordilleras where they have rice terraces. But is it our place to tell them what kind of homes they will build? That is now one of those controversies involving heritage. Hindi yan parating may sagot. Okay? Hindi yan parating, hindi ganun ka-neat yung ating mga sagot sa mga problema ng heritage. Gayunpaman, there's this. Pag tinignan mo yung rice terraces and the landscape is very traditional, you will get more tourists. Pero, it still remains for the residents of the area, the owners of the rice terraces, to say how they are going to live. So, yun yung mga balancing of interests natin dyan. So, ano pa ba? So, mayroon din tayong, how do you call this? Mayroon din tayong other forms of heritage. Yung pinaka-common na nakikita, yung pinaka-common nating nakikita na heritage, of course, ay yung mga simbahan. Hindi po lahat ng mga lumang simbahan ay deklarado, but 36 of our old churches have been declared as national cultural treasures, and 4 of them have been declared World Heritage Sites. Pero serial nomination siya. Ibig sabihin, isang category yung 4 na simbahan na yon. So that's the Miagao Church in Iloilo, the Santa Maria Church in Ilocos Sur, the Paway Church in Ilocos Norte, and Holy Cow. I know there's another one. The San Agustin Church in Intramuros. By the way, pag mayroong nag-claim na kanila yung pinakalumang simbahan sa buong Pilipinas, unless that is the church in Intramuros, the San Agustin Church in Intramuros, it's not true. Because the oldest church in the country is the San Agustin Church. Right? Magandang gabi sa lahat. Sabi ni Yeng, our highland rice terracing system here is almost akin to the Satoyama in Japan. Sabi ni Rods Cholang, sarap mag-ani, sabay chanting. Oo, meron pa nga silang parang gong festival, but it's not exactly a festival. It is a rite na umaakyat yung mga katutubo, yung mga farmers, sa terraces, makikita mo marami sila, the whole community naggagamit ng gongs para to scare away the rats. Kasi kinakain nga yung bigas. So yun, that's also part of the heritage, part of the traditions. Now, rice is, it's so prevalent sa ating Philippine society that rice is life. So maraming traditions talaga pagdating sa bigas. So, halimbawa, sa mga Tagalog, yung kumakanta pag nag-aani, kumakanta pag nagtatanim, magtanim, ay bibiro. And then, meron din during the harvest of the green rice or yung pinipig season. So, hindi lahat ng bigas iniintay na mag-ripen. Yung iba, inaani habang green pa lang sila at yan yung tradisyon ng pipigan or yung pag-harvest at gagawing pinipig, yung green rice. So, the nice thing about it is, yung ibang kasi the Tagalog region used to include Palawan. So, may mga Tagalog farmers in Palawan when I was there in the early 1990s who still had the tradition na kumakanta, umattend ako dun sa pinipigan. At they still had all the traditional songs na naririnig ko sa Malolos, Bulacan. Ano bang government agency ang may task to determine if a place is a heritage site or not? Sabi ni Saysay 1988. Medyo complicated yan. It's the National Historical Commission and the National Commission for Culture and the Arts and the Records Management and Archives Office. Okay? The National Archives. Nagbago na pala yung pangalan niya. And for languages, Commission ng Wikang Filipino, because language is also a form of heritage. Diba? But language is so political nowadays. Hindi niyo ba napapansin, every time I post about language, merong galit. Parati. Because the debate of Tagalog as the national language has been raging since the 1930s. Now, some people believe that debate should continue. My own opinion is, let it continue without me. Sabi ni Eddie Lagarde, is watching from Riyadh. Daryl Butil, di po ba dapat trabaho ng LGU yung paghanap ng mga heritage sites? That is partially correct. Okay? Ang nagde-determine ng, the final determination is made by the cultural agencies. Kasi maaari silang mag-issue ng cease and desist orders to stop a heritage site from being destroyed. But the LGUs have to come up with their list of heritage sites. And they should have done so as early as 2010. So kung hindi pa ginagawa ng inyong mga mayor at wala pa kayong mga listahan ng heritage ninyo dun sa inyong lugar, then pwede nyo pong kalampagin ang inyong mga LGU. Tinatanong Adrian Abuhandan, wala ba tayong mga ruins? Marami tayong mga ruins. Pati tao, ruins eh. Pero, yes, marami po tayo at marami po tayong declared na ruins. One of the churches, I'm not sure if it was Minalin Church, but some of we have ruins that are declared. Hello, Albay! Sa yung simbahan sa Legazpi, sorry Albay, yung simbahan sa Legazpi, dun sa tanawin ng Mayon, those are ruins. Kagsawa ruins. Diba? Sabi ni Betchay, ang pinipig masarap po, lalo-lalo na pag bagong gawa. Oo, lalo na yung pag mainit pa, tapos medyo malutong, lalagyan mo ng ng asukal at saka gatas, o kaya asukal at saka coconut milk. Yung unang piga ng ng gata, ang sarap. Ano pa? So, we have a very extensive heritage law. Kaya lang po, there is a time when we were strictly enforcing it and that's why nagkaroon ng issue tungkol dun sa Torre de Manila. Dun sa 2009 na batas, nakalagay doon that nakadefine kung anong heritage at included doon ang landscapes. So, it was the opinion of the Board of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts na Rizal is so important and his monument, which was declared also a national cultural treasure by itself, is so important that even the landscape must be declared as important cultural property or part of the heritage site and the national cultural treasure. Bakit? Kasi nga, among other things, Rizal is uh, our primary hero, even if not declared. Take note, walang batas. And he should dominate the landscape. In fact, nung nilagay yung monumento doon, yun yung purpose. It was supposed to be the tallest structure in its area. Bakit hindi sang-ayon ang mga cultural agencies doon sa Torre de Manila? Because it sticks out like a sore thumb. When we were doing that case, I was prosecuting the case and Attorney Ahmed was the first hearing officer of the NCCA under the new law. So what we did was we called the attention of Torre de Manila and served a cease and desist order. Ngayon, this is where it became complicated. The agency in charge of historical sites is the National Historical Commission. So yung National Historical Commission dito, sila po yung nagbigay ng permiso sa DMCI na gawin yung Torre de Manila. But before that, during the term of Fred Lim as mayor, nagkagulo na doon sa Sanggunian. And even before that, doon sa permit system, mahiwaga. Kasi doon sa area na yon, by itself, without considering the heritage laws, sa area na yon, may height limitation ang mga buildings of 7 floors only. Ibig sabihin, this was not solely yung the city council could overturn that provision, pero 2 beses silang nagkagulo about it. Let's just use the term gulo in place of controversy, in place of possible lagayan. Kasi yun ang mga narinig naming kwento tungkol doon. So, yung so nung nagkakagulo na, and Erap was the mayor, what Erap did was, and to his credit, he said, toss the issue to the NHCP and ask them, ano ba? NHCP, kayong mag-decide. And surprise, surprise, the NHCP, headed at the time by Maria Serena Jokno, yes, the sister of Chel Jokno, said na, ay, ang nakalagay naman lang yata sa batas is 5 meters lang beyond Rizal Park ang pwede natin i-consider ng buffer zone at yun lang po ang i-restrict natin. So, since malayo yung Torre de Manila, okay lang. Nung umangal ang NCCA, sabi ng NCCA, you forgot. The landscape is also historical and it is also cultural. Nung umayaw na mag-issue ng CDO or cease and desist order ang NHCP, NCCA did it itself. On the board at the time was now Senator Pia Cayetano at to her credit, nilaban niya talaga ito. And what happened was, eventually, after we served the cease and desist order, for a while, tumigil yung DMCI sa pag-build. And then, after 1 week, they continued building. We stopped them when they were on the 20th floor. And they continued building. So the Knights of Rizal, which takes care of the monument, filed a case and asked for a temporary restraining order in the Supreme Court against the Torre de Manila. Surprise! Ginrant yung TRO. The ponensya at the time was Justice Hardelesa. And he was in charge of managing the case. At umabot ito sa oral arguments. I wish you had seen that. It might still be floating around the internet, possibly here on YouTube. Now, during the pre-trial conference in the Supreme Court, tinanong ni Justice Hardelesa, okay, entry of appearances, sino ang mga counsels dito? So the counsels for DMCI, the counsel for the City of Manila, they showed up, and then si Solgen Florian Hilbay at the time said, I am the counsel for NCCA. Kasi ang ginawa ng Supreme Court, Nung tinanggap nila yung petition from the Knights of Rizal, nag-issue sila ng order impleading the NC's finailan lang yata ang finailan lang ng Knights of Rizal was NHCP. Idinamay ang NCCA ng Korte Suprema. So, now we were parties. Hinanap ngayon ni Justice Ardilesa, where is the counsel for the NCCA? Sabi ni Florin Hilbay, I am the counsel for the NCCA, but not for the NHCP. Kasi nga, ang NHCP dito is the one that dropped the ball. So, sabi ni Justice Ardilesa, so, off the record, where is Attorney Angeles? I'll go here. So, okay, sige. Solgen will represent the cultural agencies first. Later on, the NHCP's counsel became Chel Joknong. So, ayun na. The problem was, Solgen Hilbay did not have an understanding of what heritage is. Possibly he understood the law, but not to the extent those of us who were practicing heritage law at the time, hindi ganong level. Ultimately, it came down to this. Bakit pumayag ang NHCP? Hindi fully ma-explain ng NHCP, pero stymied talaga ang Supreme Court at the time, and it was a divided decision. Justice Ardilesa did his research. In fact, he came up with this conclusion, that the Philippines is possibly the only country in the world where its heritage protection is contained in the Constitution. O, diba? Saan ka pa? So, yun yung one of the stories there. There are more stories to that one, including nung nag-serve kami ng CDO, kaharap namin 100 security guard, ganon. So, sabi ni Architecture, how about putting up local historical commissions? Actually, all the LGUs are empowered and in fact were directed in, if I'm not mistaken, about 2001 to create their local culture and arts councils. At kasama po dyan yung pag-set up ng sarili nilang mga historical commissions or bodies. Thank you, Ma'am Kate Lim. Sabi ni Saysay, isn't it difficult to determine heritage sites? By the way, difficult is an irrelevant question. How do you determine level of difficulty? Or anything that is part of culture, considering the number of times we were educated by colonizers, mostly historical documents were even damaged by the war. Okay, I think that you might be unaware that we have about 9 to 12 million documents contained in the Records Management and Archives Office, which includes documents that date back to the 15th century. 17th century. The first and oldest document, of course, is considered the Laguna copper plate, among others. It's a document because there is writing on it, even if it is a copper plate. A lot of us think that most of our heritage was destroyed. Well, a lot of it was, actually. Kasi the National Museum suffered a direct hit during World War II. One of the reasons why MacArthur was so opposed to a carpet bombing of Manila, which at the time the Air Force Commanding General ignored. Sabi ni MacArthur, do not bomb Manila. Sabi ni Air Force General, as if. And he carpet bombed Manila. Manila is the second most destroyed city, was the second most destroyed city during World War II, second only to Warsaw. And the only structure that was left standing in Intramuros was the San Agustin Church. That's why it is one of the oldest structures, in fact, the oldest church in the country. Right? We have, how do you, the number of times we were educated by colonizers is of no moment. Even that education is history. Even that education is heritage. What we need is an understanding of our history and why we think the way we think. Like we keep telling everybody, some of the historians I have talked to say that it is impossible to debate on the heroism of Bonifacio if we're still going to lapse into the rhetoric of the 1930s presidential elections. Okay, we've talked about this before. Part of understanding our heritage is understanding also that history has been written with a particular angle in mind. Almost always. Okay. So, because the historians, when they write their papers or they write their books, meron silang theory, meron silang hypothesis. And yung pagsusulat nila yon is a way of proving their hypothesis. Okay? Think of the books as thesis. Diba? At dun sa thesis na yon, meron silang educated guess about a particular present, how history is to be analyzed and interpreted. Okay? So many of us suffer from a lot of misconceptions. Unang-una, ang daming nagsasabing, ano bang heritage yung meron tayo? Parang wala naman yung mga lumang simbahan. But you forget, intangible cultural heritage. Bahay kubo. And the structure of the bahay kubo is heritage. Diba? Including yung materials niya. That is why in our Heritage Act, yung mga areas kung saan tinatanim yung mga materyales na ginagamit para sa ibang heritage, halimbawa, yung mga areas na tinataniman or kung saan tumutubo yung mga reeds na ginagamit sa ceiling ng mga bahay sa Batanes is considered heritage. Sabi ni Rosario Tuason, this is a good topic for discussion sa mga bata in school. We must start valuing our heritage and protecting them as well. And in fact, it is in the law. Sabi ni Renz, bakit si Hilbay nag-represent against Torre de Manila? He was representing as tribune of the people. Sabi ni Adrian, bakit kaya parang tayong mga Pilipino walang regard sa heritage and culture natin to the point that we can tolerate cases like Torre de Manila? I think it is a lack of education and a lack of awareness. Kaya nga, bahagi ng activism ko, because activism is not a bad word, is the appreciation and awareness of heritage. At isang bahagi nun ang pag-educate sa taong bayan, anybody I can talk to, about the appreciation of heritage and how we should be looking at it. Sabi ni De Franz, I'm Dutch, but when I was in Cebu, what struck me was that the Western influence slapped me in the face, mainly American and Spanish. What I missed was the original structure, and it struck me as sad. What original structure are you looking for? All layers of history is heritage. That's why we don't just save 200-year-old churches. We save 1930s buildings. We save 1940s houses. Not only because of their aesthetic and historical value, but because they represent a particular period in our history. Diba? So, all of it is valuable. Okay, I'll tell you a story. When I was in Italy, when I was in Rome, actually, for a conference in heritage, I asked the conservators, how do you decide? Oh no, I wasn't the one who asked. Somebody else asked. How do you decide what to save? Kasi dito sa atin, meron pang decision-making process. Isi-save ba natin to o hindi? Mahalaga ba to? I-save ba natin to? Or do we let people tear them down so they can use the land? In Italy, the conservators say, and this is actually a principle in conservation, sabi nila, na-shock sila. We don't choose. We are not in a position to choose. We let future generations decide. Kasi sila yung magmamana nito. Kasi right now, we might not also be in a position to say, mahalaga ito. Oh, this structure is from the 1960s. Ew, it's ugly. But a generation from now, they might say, oh my gosh, it's from the 60s. Ang ganda. They're the ones who have that power. Sabi ni Manuel Miranda, preservation of heritage is fine. Wait. Right? There's a difference between preservation and conservation. Like I said, there are decision-making processes. Dito, to save or not to save is part of the decision-making process. But if you imagine a building, let's say that's 200 years old, hindi yan unchanged since the time that it was built. So, pag may gumagamit yan, or let's say it's a church, every time may bagong pare, ay lagyan natin ng ganito dito, ay lagyan natin ng ganito. So, the changes, or let's say the renovations made in the 1800s of an original structure that was erected in 1700s, the later additions are part of that history. But when you say preservation, it means you're going to hold it in a particular period unchanged. Now, some people think that conservation means that you have to restore to the original. Not true. One of the decision-making processes that was very difficult was in Greece, in the Temple of Athena Nike. Ang daming nangyari. That temple is what? 1,000 years old? And so, ano nangyari doon? What about the Moorish period? What about the period when they were overrun by so-and-so and so-and-so? How do we choose? That's where the experts and the stakeholders have to come in. Is this significant? What about the mosaic put in the in the 12th century? Paano yan? All of that, everything that has happened, like everything that has happened to us, the Filipino people, is important to note because that is the Philippine story. The story of a structure also includes the changes that were made, including the changes in ownership, the changes in climate, the adaptations that we had to use, had to make. Diba? Sabi ni Betchay, San Agustin Church has a beautiful museum, andun mga treasures. Okay, we don't use the word treasure to refer to heritage because treasure means something else completely, except when the Constitution says are the treasures of the nation, means it is important or precious. Okay, pero dun sa Civil Code, iba po yung meaning ng treasure, yung hidden treasure. Sabi ni architecture, and I agree, some parish priests destroy heritage churches. If not part of it, they renovate. And I agree. Halimbawa, some priests, they think na kailangan palitadahan yung simbahan ng semento when you still have to determine kung tama yung paggamit ng semento o dapat yung original lime covering ang gagamitin. Hi kay Ma'am Astrud. Sabi niya, sana may ganitong lesson or any topic na magpapa-educate sa atin, hindi lang sa mga buhay artista ang isinasama sa mga primetime news sa TV. Well, I'm not sure kasi if TV is a very welcoming medium. Kasi minsan, pagka it's the ratings game eh. O meron tayong magandang heritage program dito. And dati meron there were some that were funded by the NCCA. Pero pag tinapat mo na dun sa mga telenovela, ay matatalo. Diba? So that's why it's important to have our own BBC type. Now, we'll not care about the ratings. Ilalabas yung mga mahahalagang programa. So, yes, I agree with you. However, hindi natin dapat isali sila dun sa mga commercial stations. Kasi ang bottom line ng commercial stations is how to make money. Yun, sabi ni Ma'am Saysay, Ma'am ba? 1988. Preserving and conserving our heritage not only reminds us of how we started as a nation, it also helps us understand how we move forward as society. But part of our history also is that time when we weren't yet a nation. It's called our prehistory. So yes, as we don't call it anymore the history of our nation because we existed even not as a nation prior to Spanish colonization, di ba? So, prehistory is just as important. Cagayan Valley, like I mentioned in some of our lives before, is actually a fossil valley. So, maraming na-recover dyan na tusks ng elephas, which was our, do you know that according to William Henry Scott, nung dumating dito yung mga praile in the late 1500s, meron pa tayong mga elepante. They're smaller than the African and Indian elephants, but they were large enough and were being used as farm workhorses. We had a name, or at least sa Tagalog region, we had a name, Gadya, for elephant. So usually when a culture has a name for something, they had it. Tapos garin, yung mga pulseras na ginagawa out of elephant tusks. Okay? Sabi ni Marvin Verino, first time kong makawatch ng live mo, mostly kasi sa FB ako nanonood. Kaya nga nag-YouTube din tayo to create a newer, another kind of audience. Sabi ni Ma'am Rose Maridasa, I'm from Santa Barbara, Iloilo. The oldest golf club is here. But so funny, every day a lot of Koreans and some Japanese play golf. But for the locals, local government, they don't have a program to promote golf as a sport. Mahal kasi. It's expensive. But yes, I agree that it should be promoted. I agree in having sports programs. Tinatanong ni Ma'am Ilo, wild person, kung totoo ba to? Oo, totoo. Karen is watching from Hong Kong. Sabi ni Manuel Miranda, people might accuse me of being anti-Catholic Church because of this. Actually, no. I often met with the bishops. And when Father Reuter was still alive, he was a very strong advocate for heritage. A lot of the bishops actually are strong advocates. And I'd like to give, if anybody here is from Iloilo, shout out to Bishop Angel Lagdameo, my favorite bishop of all. He's the most conservation-minded and possibly also the most radical-minded bishop there is. He's very, he's so good at what he does. Sabi ni Jose UK Garden, ang Pilipinas po rich in cultures. And he is correct in saying cultures. Although nakalagay sa ating saligang batas, there is a Philippine culture, but that we are a multicultural society. Ibig sabihin, ang kultura natin ay yung pag-encompass ng lahat ng kultura ng ating iba't ibang lugar at mga communities ng ating mga katutubo. Okay. What about the San Sebastian Church? Sabi ni Roldan Ranoco, it has been declared. I'm not sure if it's important cultural property, but I think it is a national cultural treasure. It is the first and possibly only holy steel church in the country. And there are a lot of theories about it. One of the theories, take note, it is a theory, it has not been proven, is that it was possibly from a design by Gustav Eiffel. Not proven. Okay? However, it was created at about the same period when the Eiffel Tower and other steel structures were being built. Okay? It is also prefabricated, the San Sebastian Church. It was created somewhere else and put together when it arrived here. Para siyang yung Statue of Liberty. Ginawa somewhere else, pero dito pinatayo. Sabi ni JP ko, ang tutuban sayang ginawang mall. Oops, not necessarily. Ang tawag dyan ay adaptive reuse. We don't have to use a heritage structure strictly in the way that it was originally made. So kung bahay, it is still heritage conservation to adaptively reuse it, maintain the structure, maintain the significant features of it, but adapt it for another use. That way, kunwari restaurant, yung bahay ginawang restaurant, you will still see the features of why it is important, why it is significant for its period, why it is representative of its period, at makikita pa natin yung mga gayak that will inform us of our aesthetic values, ano yung tingin natin maganda nung panahon na yon, at kung bakit nagagandahan pa rin tayo hanggang ngayon. Is there any significance, sabi ni E.J. Ray, sa mga old markings like 1911 Luzon datum? Saan po siya nakamarka? Sabi ni Manuel, why is it that the majority of talk of conservation or preservation consists mostly of preserving old churches? Kasi pinakaunang nakikita natin. At halos lahat ng bayan mayroong lumang simbahan in various stages of conservation. Yung iba nasira na hindi mo na nakikita yung significance niya. Pero, it was one of the most, it was the first. So, nung nagdideklara ang NCCA at ang National Museum at ang National Historical Institute ng mga historical and cultural sites, ang unang phase was churches. So originally there were 26 churches that were declared in addition to those that Marcos had identified as cultural treasures or historical sites in 1972. Dinagdagan yun ng NCCA ng 26, and then later on, dinagdagan ng National Museum. So now there are about 36 churches that are declared national cultural treasures. National cultural treasure means it is the highest recognition of cultural value in a particular item of heritage. How does Torre de Manila dumping its dirty water? Does it have water treatment structure or is it dumping in Manila Bay? Well, a lot of Manila is dumping in Manila Bay. If you will notice, diba, nung inaayos na ng DENR yung Manila Bay, one of the first places that they inspected was the sewerage pipe that empties into the Manila Yacht Club. That explains kung bakit ang baho ng Manila Yacht Club natin. Most of Manila dumps there. However, in accordance to the DENR's regulations, all buildings have to have their own wastewater treatment facilities, and especially condominiums, hotels, etc., and other structures like these. Animals like gadya, we also had prehistoric mythical monsters. The most popular up to now, the Bakunawa. Interested lang ako sa myths and legends. Right now, the Bakunawa is still in the area of mythology. We haven't found any fossils that will support that, but who knows, diba? Maybe in the future, if we will pay attention to our Philippine archaeology. Meron pong binabanggit, sabi ni Renz Elgin Pugeda, sa history that Rizal objected to exhibiting our katutubos in one of the exhibits in Spain. Insights niyo po about making exhibits of our katutubos. Well, I'm not sure if there was an actual exhibit in Spain. I'm going to have to research on that. But the St. Louis Exposition of 1901, if I'm not mistaken, patay na po si Rizal. But Mark Twain and other Americans did object to displaying humans in as display materials even in these world expositions. So, I have no record or I have not read anything with regard to Rizal's objection to that. I'm going to have to do research. Sabi ni Architecture, Opera Altis, Guideline for Heritage Conservation in Churches is a Vatican document. Yes. Possibly not even taught in seminaries. When I was, I hate saying that, when I was commissioner of the NCCA, I was commissioner for cultural heritage of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. And part of my job was to talk to the CPCP about lecturing in their churches. And many of the bishops were very enthusiastic about this, pero hindi na po na-formalize into a program kasi 3 years lang po yung term ko. Well, umabot ako ng 4 years. Sabi ni Jenny Veb Salcedo, yung mga kwentong pambata nun, ngayon mostly hindi na alam ng mga bata tulad ng mga anak ko, sinasabi nila, ano yung Capri at Duende? Yes, very significant observation kasi yung ating mythology is also intangible cultural heritage. At saka yung mga games natin, yung mga tumbang preso, patintero, and all of that, lahat yan ay bahagi ng ating intangible cultural heritage. Sabi ni Adrian Abuhandan, nagdebate kami dati regarding sa cultural heritage and my classmate made a joke about preserving shopping malls. Right now, um, yung Crystal Mall sa Escolta got destroyed in the war, but if it had survived, it would be a heritage structure. Some of the old buildings in Binondo and Santa Cruz, Manila, and in fact even in Paco, are commercial buildings. Some of them might even be considered the precursors of the malls. So, yes, they are now heritage because they inform us of a commercial past. Diba? Including yung mga gayak-gayak niya, how the building was constructed. It tells us of the climate and the conditions at the time, what materials were available, and so on. And even reflects Philippine aesthetic during the Art Deco, Art Nouveau, Beaux-Arts period here in the country. Sabi ni Daisy Collis, it's nice to see you talking with a spark in your eye. You're really a historian and love your country. Pag negative ang topic, bad mood ka. Hindi naman. Ano lang, nakakapagod lang minsan pag paulit-ulit yung ibang questions. Pero heritage kasi is something that I have been doing since 2001. Sabi ni Megazoid 2016, bakit po pinag-iba ni Atienza ang High Alay Building? You know, former mayor and now Congressman Lito Atienza and I have an on-again and off-again frenemyship. When he was mayor, this was my first encounter with conservation. And yes, the High Alay Building was the land was donated or was assigned kasi it was held by the PCGG for a long time. And it was assigned to the Supreme Court para doon ilagay yung courthouses ng Manila kasi kalat-kalat yung mga courts ng Manila. And I agree, kailangan ng isang lugar. However, when we found out about it, it was a Welton Becket building. And the architect is responsible for the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion and so many heritage structures in Florida and in California. And it was it's so significant here because it was the only thing, one of the few buildings outside of Intramuros that survived Manila's carpet bombing. And it was the first building to use the new technology of windows that were hinged on top and could open up and allow airflow into the building. They were also using one of those newfangled at the time decorative devices called the glass brick. Kaya yung isang portion doon, di ba puro glass siya, made of these glass square bricks, which was innovative at the time. So, but Mayor Lito at the time felt that it was necessary to put up the courthouses there. And at the time that we were rallying against it, nabigay na niya yung kontrata for demolition to somebody. So, that was a bad confluence of events. I disagree with then Mayor Lito Atienza's move, but as a result of the High Alay fiasco, nabuhay po, suddenly nagkaroon tayo ng heritage movement dito sa Pilipinas. It took a loss. In 1887, in Madrid, Exposición de las Islas Filipinas, sabi ni Renz Pugyeda. I have to check nga what Rizal actually said. Okay. Talagang nagalit ako kay Atienza noon, sabi ni Ma'am Pinay. Hinihintay ko lang tumanda ako para makapasok sa building na yun kasi nga gambling area siya. Yes, pero a lot of the debutantes held their coming out in the Sky Room during the time. And nung panahon ng giyera, ginamit din ng mga Hapon as an interrogation area yung Sky Room. So maraming layers of history. Nung una, ang sinasabi ni Mayor Lito, lugar yan para sa sugalan, hindi yan heritage. Of course not. Lahat naman yan pwedeng maging heritage. Di ba? Sabi ni Home Cooking Easy and Simple, bakit wala ng promotion to the young generation about Nayong Pilipino? Kasi giniba na po siya. Diba? Meron pa rin Nayong Filipino Foundation, but diba, remember, si Presidente, he suddenly fired the entire board for corruption. Kasi walang ginagawa yung board kung hindi mag-isip kung paano nila pagkakakitaan yung lugar na tinalaga sa kanila sa na reclaimed area. Di ba napapaligiran sila ng mga entertainment areas, gambling and all of that. So, yun ang inaatupag nila. Yung lugar ng dating Nayong Filipino, giniba na po yan at inacquire ng airport. Thank you, Argo. Sabi niya, share po tayo. Sabi ni Elmer Bernardino, kung ang munisipyo po ay pre-American colonial era, tapos pinag-iba ng mayor para magpatayo ng bagong munisipyo, di po ba may liability ang mayor legally? Yes, meron. You have to file the case though. Basahin niyo yung Republic Act 10066. There are criminal penalties for that. I hope you're the first person to file under that law. May balita po ba kayo doon sa pagbabalik ng nililok na kinuha ng Korte Suprema sa Estrella? I don't know that story. Sabi ni Checks and Lines, by that definition pala, Pasig River and its channels, estuaries should be considered heritage. Sana lang maibalik ang ganda at sigla ng Pasig. Well, even if it isn't declared heritage, it is, it will forever belong to the state. So, yung tributaries, estuaries, all of that, bodies of water, keep them working. Kasi babahain tayo otherwise. Sabi ni Renz, ilang taon po ang kailangan para maituring na heritage ang isang building? 50 years. Hi kay Sherry Ann Pedros from Antwerp, Belgium. At si Eric Rivera who's watching from Abu Dhabi. Sana yung Intramuros ma-preserve natin. Wala tayong i-preserve. San Agustin na lang at saka parts of the Manila Cathedral ang naiwan doon. So what we have is Presidential Decree 1616 that says that if you're going to build in Intramuros, it has to be a structure from any period between 1600 and the early 1900s. So, be careful when you use the word preserve, because preserve means you're going to hold it to that particular state and keep it within that particular state. So, kung ruins siya forever in that state. Bibilangin mo yung bricks, you're going to keep the bricks exactly where they are. So, there is very little left to preserve in Intramuros because the only original structures left there are San Agustin Church, the ruins of the Loyola, the Jesuit seminary there, which was across the street from the old Ateneo. What was left standing was the Manila Cathedral, but only parts of it, and San Agustin Church. And you know why the San Agustin Church survived? Because when they were carpet bombing the city of Manila, they were using it as a reckoning point. In other words, pagka nagko-compute sila, dapat doon bumagsak sa Malate yung mga bombs. Magko-compute sila ng distance between Malate and San Agustin Church. Makikita kasi ng mga bombers, okay, approximately so many degrees north by northwest and so many degrees chu-chu-chu-chu in relation to San Agustin Church. That's the only reason the Americans did not bomb it. Tinanong ni Renz Elgin Pugeda, meron po ba tayong heritage mosques? I was trying to save one. That was, but yes, marami po tayong heritage mosques. But there was one that I lost. Well, I lost because hindi namin naihabol yung declaration. There was a mosque that was designed like a ziggurat. And it was in where the old Torogan is, where MSU, We're near no, a barangay away from Mindanao State University in Iligan. So it was very near there. Sabi ni Checks in Lines, I'd rather give my tax money to heritage conservation, promotion, and research kesa sa gama na PhilHealth at SSS. Unfortunately, PhilHealth and SSS are mandated by law your contributions. Meanwhile, we do fund, well, there are two funds for heritage. One is the National Endowment Fund for Culture and the Arts, which is the NCCA. It was originally funded by a grant from PAGCOR, 100 million, tapos continuously funded every year by 10% of the travel tax. Okay, so lumalaki yon. And we only use the interest of that for culture and arts projects. Pero medyo generic yon. Republic Act 10066 created the National Endowment Fund for Conservation. And it's supposed to be created again by funding from PAGCOR. However, dahil hindi maganda yung pagkaka-word ng batas, something went wrong at BICAM, lumalabas na walang period for PAGCOR to decide when to give the money. So, kailangan i-demand letter na ang PAGCOR. Sabi ni Pinay Paparazzi, Intramuros admin is starting to rebuild structures in Intramuros. Hindi po, matagal na po nag-start, 1974 pa po. They already built the former ayuntamiento with the architecture based during the Spanish times. Yes, because we have the records. But the reconstruction of the Intramuros began in 1974 under Jaime Laya, who was the executive officer. With his action officer was Esperanza Gatmonton, and it is part just of the continuing project that is in Intramuros. So hindi siya just starting now. It started in 1974. Natanong ni Renz anong update sa Metropolitan Theater. I understand that they're going to attempt to unveil this year. It should be now completed by this year. Rayo is watching from Yokohama. Are there benefits for your house to be considered a heritage house? Yes, there are some. There are discounts on your real estate taxes. However, there are also restrictions. Once your house is declared a heritage house, right of first refusal ang National Museum or the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. You can't just sell it. And lalagyan po ng parang lien. Lalagyan siya ng tatak doon sa titulo ninyo that it is a heritage house. And so, pag binibenta yan, nakalagay yun doon. So, kailangan i-offer muna yung right of first refusal to the National Commission for Culture and the Arts. Sabi ni Architecture, new structures built around heritage churches are off designs to period styles in architectural character. I agree. But off designs also include the really, really bad reproductions around heritage sites, such as, but not limited to, did you see those structures that house the Jollibee and McDonald's in Vigan around the church? Those are horrifying. Sabi ni Megazord 2016, kamuntik nang sirain ng DPWH ang Emeralino Mansion dito sa Sariaya, Quezon due to road widening na gawa ni architect Andres Luna de San Pedro, national artist pamangkin ni Juan Luna. Do you know who saved that? Kami ni Attorney Ahmed yan. We held hearings there and we issued the permanent CDO. So I don't know if nasa record pa ng NCCA yan, but the DPWH, they stopped expanding the road there. Sabi ni Checks and Lines, heritage house dito sa city namin, ginawang Starbucks. Well, there's a Starbucks inside the Intramuros walls. I have mixed feelings about that, but it's there. Fort Drum? Tinatanong ni Ubaba Sama, yung Fort Drum po ba kasama sa heritage site at bakit hindi naayos? Where is that? Tinatanong ni Melo Marcos, paano bang makapunta sa museo ng Malacanang? Pwede bang walk-in doon? I don't know, ngayon pandemic. Dati by appointment. Sabi ni Liz Veran, watching from KSA, we hope magkaroon ng batas na magbabawal magpalit ng pangalan ng isang lugar, bayan o probinsya dahil nawawala ang historical significance nito. Meron na po, Republic Act 10066 also contains a provision na lahat ng pagbabago ng isang lugar, ng pangalan ng isang lugar ay kailangan dumaan sa National Historical Commission of the Philippines, including Congress. Kailangan kumonsulta muna ang Kongreso, actually hindi, humingi ng permiso ang Kongreso bago mag-legislate ng pagbabago ng pangalan ng isang kalye o lugar. Merong mansion sa Barangay 171 North, Caloocan City and is currently abandoned. I saw a plaque with the name of one of the family of our heroes. We have to locate Okay, here's where the law goes wrong. Okay, kailangan ng complaint. So somebody has to file a complaint to save that site. And in fact, if maayos sana yung ating endowment fund for conservation, kaya ngang bilhin yung mga lugar na yon ng ating mga cultural agencies. Pero, political will. Fort Drum ay ang El Fraile Island or the concrete battleship. Matagal na yung sinira. Pati nga yung Batong Buhaya, sinira nila. Nasa Pasig yun eh. Bakit? This was long before my time. Nung nasira siya, I think somebody had an interest in building a structure there. Do Gabaldon buildings, are Gabaldon buildings included in the heritage program? Yes, and in fact, we included it in the program of the DepEd itself. So, kailangan ang first line of defense dyan is the DepEd. Sabi ni Pinay Paparazzi, basta malayo sa compound ng Vegan Cathedral kahit na eyesore siya. Sorry, Sutilyang, dahil dyan ako kumakain. Hindi nga siya malayo sa Vegan Cathedral katabi. 'Di ba? So, kahit magsutil ka sa akin, it's not gonna change my mind. Sabi ni Adrian, meron pong nakalagay na for sale. O sige, what do you want me to do about it? Ang problema nga kasi is that you can file a complaint with the NCCA. I don't know kung pwede na ako mag-practice ng heritage law. Is it manageable for you to have a YouTube channel for this heritage and conservation topic only? Ang dami ko namang gagawin. We include this in our regular chikahan. Okay, last two questions. Diyos ko, magagalit na si Harry sa akin. Sabi ni Elmer Bernardino, thank you for sharing your knowledge to us, Hampas Lupa. Uy, Hampas Lupa din ako. Now I know more about laws than emotion-based knowledge. Kita nyo na attorney dahil sa inyo nakaka-English daw. Grabe kayo. Sabi ni Alpax the Great, yung Vega House ng Balingasag, Misamis Oriental, bakit di po government na mamahala doon? Kasi government can't just take over heritage property. Pagka privately owned yan, kailangan pa rin for the government to take over, kailangan mag-eminent domain to own it o kaya to enter into a management agreement with the owners. So, however, pwedeng pigilan ng gobyerno yung pagpapasira nito o kaya yung pagsisira based on negligence. Tinanong ni Julius Hilario, it's the Supreme Court decision of the Torre de Manila. Valid. Yung Torre de Manila. Okay lang. Kasi pumayag ang NHCP. Now you know who to blame. Sabi ni Roldan Ranoco, what about the old PNR station? Which one? Sa Paco? Well, yun yung mali eh. May nagka-interest kasi sa property, wanted to build a mall. Tinigil ng NHCP at the time at ng ibang heritage advocates, they came to a compromise at sabi, yung facade na lang i-maintain. Ang ganda ng building na yon. Unfortunately, iyon, giniba, tapos wala palang pera para magtayo ng kahit ano doon, iniwan na nakatiwangwang. Sama talaga ng internet connection ko, sabi ni Melo Marcos, ginagamit ko pa naman yung info na galing kay attorney sa class ko. Dun sa replay, pwede po. Merong, ano ba to? Bakit hindi na-preserve yung Fort Drum sa El Fraile? It has historical significance. Meron ngang nagkaroon ng interest dun sa property. By the way, okay, forts and camps and all of that, they are under the purview of the National Historical Commission, regulatory body nila, National Historical Commission, but ownership is with the PNP. So, in some instances, dahil hindi informed ang PNP tungkol sa conservation, hindi naaalagaan, and in many cases, inappropriate yung pagdadagdag ng mga structures or mga dun sa building itself. Is Paco Park a heritage site? Yes, it has a plaque and everything. It's a historical site. Okay, this is interesting. Chris Bilawan says, when does preservation, please use the term conservation, kasi very specific ang preservation, go in the way of what we call progress? It doesn't. It shouldn't. It can't. Ang sinasabi nilang, tinatawag nilang progress really is an interest in real estate. Pero a heritage property can be used to its fullest value without destroying it. Halimbawa, bahay. Nandyan, let's say bahay na nandito sa Santa Cruz. The example there is the house of Andres Luna de San Pedro. No, sorry. The house of Juan Luna in Santa Cruz, Manila. Which is original in all aspects. Since bawal siyang ipag-iba before, yung may-ari, ginawa niya lang bodega. Now the law prevents the destruction of that house actively and now also prevents the destruction by negligence. Okay? Gusto nila kasing mag-iba na lang yung bahay para magamit yung yung lupa at makapagtayo ng multi-story building kasi mas malaki ang kikitain ng may-ari. Now that is the reason why sinasabi ng ating salinggong batas, we can restrict its disposition. Meaning we can restrict its use. Yung kumbaga, it is the price we pay to save our heritage and to keep tangible evidence of our history. Isipin mo, bahay ni Juan Luna yun. Okay? Fortunately, yung apo ng may-ari now is managing the house and has been restoring it. At hindi, doesn't look like magagamit yung lupa for a multi-story building anytime soon. Ngayon, ang sinasabi ng iba, to keep the heritage, baklasin yan at ibenta dun sa Las Casas Acusado doon sa Bataan, which we will disagree to. At yung mga ganyang cases ay maaaring makasuhan at ma-filean ng cease and desist order. Kasi, that is the price nga we pay for heritage. We limit private ownership of heritage in the sense that they cannot dispose of it in the way that they want to all the time. Okay? So, ang right of first refusal then, the best thing to do is to offer it to the National Museum or the National Commission for Culture and the Arts or the National Historical Commission if you want to sell it. Sabi ni Renz, heritage po bang property ng Pinas overseas or is just the public property of the Philippines? Well, it depends kung considered natin jurisdiction. Well, it's part of our jurisdiction. Halimbawa, yung Roppongi property natin, which was given to us as war reparations, can be considered a heritage site. Okay. Okay, last, yung lumang munisipyo ng Taytay Rizal, madali ang ipinagiba kahit na may cease and desist order ang NHCP. Did anybody file a criminal case against the mayor? See, that's the problem, is that we think that always somebody else will enforce the law. But when it comes to heritage, it has to be us. And it can be any person. Kasi nakalagay dun sa batas, any stakeholder. So kung significant yung structure na yan, anybody from Taytay, or in fact, anybody from anywhere, basta Pinoy, can actually file for a cease and desist order and then make it permanent. Yun yung tanong. Sino ang nagawang permanente niyan? Was it Marcos? Nasaan na ba yan? Ano yung isang ano? Is it Marcos who declared the law for heritage conservation? Hindi po. There was a 1968 law, Republic Act 4846, which is the National Conservation and Preservation Act. That was created by Congress. And then the Republic Act 10066, which updated that, was also a legislative act of Congress. But 10066 was passed in 2009. However, Marcos did contribute a lot to conservation. There were presidential decrees. The first was the creation of the National Artist Award, and he, by presidential decree, declared Fernando Amorsolo our first national artist. And then he had several presidential decrees recognizing Santa Ana Church, Poway Church, etc., Santa Maria Church, and all of these other churches and structures as either historical sites or cultural property. Yung Fort Bonifacio Tunnel, kung tiyesa yan, if they're reviving it for tourism, they must act in coordination with the National Historical Commission. Okay, sobra na tayo. Okay. Maraming salamat sa pagsubaybay ulit. I hope we were able to answer your questions. Hindi ko na nahapyaw ang CPP-NPA, but they are part of history. But just para maipasok ko siya kahit paano. If any of you have read the story of The Devil and Daniel Webster, which is a classic short story usually taught in English classes, it was there was this guy named Jabez Stone who sold his soul to the devil. And nung time na mangolekta yung demonyo, pumunta siya kay Daniel Webster na sikat at tanyag na abogado at the time. So nag-demand si Daniel Webster sa devil. He has to have due process. So magkaroon tayo ng hearing. Yung jury, kasi jury system dun sa kanila, was composed of all the most villainous villains in their history. At sila po yung nakaupo doon. So medyo stacked yung jury. Pati yung judge was a villain. Isang masamang tao. And eventually, dahil dun sa closing arguments ni Daniel Webster, the gist of which is here's what he said. He said, all throughout history is made up of so many people. We have our heroes, we have all of that. But yes, even the villains are part of our history. And so, we study kahit yung mga bad guys. We study the bad guys to inform us about the things that we should not do again. And not just because it's in danger of being repeated, but that we should remember these names. And this doesn't just apply to the CPP-NPA. And I always say this. Noynoy Aquino's great-grandfather was a member of Emilio Aguinaldo's cabinet. And in every generation thereafter, they were part of government, either as senators, presidents, etc. Now, how could one family hold so much power? Well, it's because we keep repeating our mistakes. We keep forgetting the sins of the past. 'Di ba? Kaya nga inaaral natin yung mga villains. Dapat inaaral natin ang CPP and NPA and their historical roots is because we have to remember where all of this began. So we don't do it again. 'Di ba? So yung mga yan, sabi ni Ma'am Ying Lipolon, like Hitler. Let's not forget. That's why nga, we study about World War II. We study about the rise in Axis powers, or we should be studying it. Because otherwise, we will be compelled to repeat it. So for example, why do we study dictators like, or fascists like Hitler and Mussolini, and why there was World War II? Because there are some things that they wanted that politicians still want up to now. Not just power, but how to attain that power. Diba? So study history, and its evidence is the study of heritage. We would like to demonize the Catholic Church, but it's difficult because they had so much contribution to our past and continue to do so in the present. So it is unfair to condemn an entire church with thousands of years of history. Yeah? The study of our history and study of our villains also opens our minds. It stops us from a sweeping generalization. We cannot condemn the entire church, but we can condemn some of the bishops who coddle terrorists, who think that activism is still a thing. Activism in the sense of trying to overthrow the government is still a thing. Diba? And so on. Heritage is simply the evidence of that past, but it talks to us. So when you look at the church, you're not just looking at a pile of adobe and limestone. You're looking at the work of Filipinos, Filipino engineers with Spanish design or a Spanish brought religion. Diba? When you look at our churches, they call it Philippine Baroque, because they were built in the tail end of the Baroque period and contain some characteristics of Baroque, diba? Yung parang maagos na designs. But really, what is the important part of that design is the Philippine part and not the Baroque part. Kasi hindi siya, strictly speaking, European Baroque. And what we call this is indigenization. It means that we took something foreign and made it our own, wholly Filipino. Even if the religion came from somewhere else, we made it a Philippine religion. Even if the concept of having a church rather than a temple was foreign to us, we made it our own. So those designs, those are not Spanish churches. Those are Philippine churches. So houses made even during the Spanish colonization are not Spanish houses, but Philippine houses built during the colonization period, during the period of our colonization. Remember that the important part of heritage is the Philippine part, but not because we reject anything foreign, but because we welcomed it and turned it into our own. Yes, even the bad guys. Okay? Maraming salamat sa pagsubaybay sa Luminous nitong araw na ito. I hope you had fun. And we'll talk more about other heritage stories in future live. Please don't forget to like and share. And please check your status sa Luminous kung naka-like and follow pa po kayo. Maraming salamat. And we'll see you tomorrow on Karambola.